everyone, it's that time of year again. It's October once again. The last 3 years of horror franchise on this YouTube channel, I covered the Universal Monsters, Golden Age of Horror movies, Hammer, and George Romero Dead Zombie movies. This year, it's Slasher October. I'll be covering Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the Friday the 13th franchise, and other miscellaneous slasher horror movies throughout this month of October. You'll remember when I made my top 100 favorite horror movie list when I first started my YouTube channel. You may or may not remember that my favorite horror movie of all time is the original Halloween from 1978. Halloween is my all-time favorite horror movie, and it's also one of my favorite movies of all time. My first experience in viewing of Halloween, I was 11 years old in 2004. I watched Halloween on DVD with my dad. To me, Michael Myers was the scariest thing to me as a little kid. After watching this movie as a kid, I was scared, spooked, traumatized. I could not sleep that night. I was so afraid of Michael Myers, thinking he was going to pop up and kill me in my sleep. I literally covered myself under my blankets. Here I am 20 years later. I love the movie, the franchise, and here I'm making a video on my favorite horror movie finally after all these years. Every horror fan generation had that one horror movie or horror character that scared them. Some people say it was Dracula, Frankenstein, werewolves, zombies, Reagan from The Exorcist, Freddy, Jason, Pinhead, Ghostface, or Chucky. For me, it was Michael Myers. To me as a little kid, Michael Myers was the scariest thing to me. Halloween is directed by John Carpenter, who prior to this directed Assault on Precinct 13. Due to that movie's success, that's why Halloween was made. And John Carpenter later going to direct movies like The Fog, The Thing, Escape from New York, They Live, Prince of Darkness, and The Mouth of Madness. This man is a legendary horror film director, probably one of the godfathers of horror movies. Right there with Dario Argento, George Romero, Wes Craven, Mario Bava, David Cronenberg, and Sam Raimi. John Carpenter is a huge Alfred Hitchcock fan and was inspired by the film techniques that he uses in this movie. Some of the characters are named and inspired from Psycho, which I'll explain later in this video. It was also produced by Debra Hill, who produced a lot of John Carpenter's movies. She also co-wrote the movie. They were also very good friends. They had a brief romance. Sadly, Debra Hill is no longer with us. She passed away in 2005 from cancer. Debra Hill said in interviews before she was a film producer, she used to babysit, and she took that experience and applied it to this movie. Mustafa Akkad was also the executive producer, who will later going to be the founder of the Halloween franchise, which I'll talk about later in this video series. After seeing Assault on Precinct 13, he hired John Carpenter to direct Halloween. This movie was originally going to be titled The Babysitter Killers, but when John Carpenter was hired to direct the movie, he wanted the story to be set on Halloween and change it up a bit. This movie shot over a budget of $300,000. It was one of the highest independent movies, grossing over $70 million at the box office, until Blair Witch Project 21 years later, 1999. Being a Halloween and Michael Myers fan I am of the franchise, I have two books about the making of this franchise. The first book right here is about the making of the first film up until the sequels, the Rob Zombie remakes, and also up until the 2018 Halloween reboot series. This book I have right here is about the making of Halloween sequel ideas that were thought of but were never made. Like, for example, they wanted to do Michael Myers versus Pinhead, which I'll talk about later. As usual in the past, I did podcasts with my friend Christian on his YouTube channel back in 2017 with my late great friend Chris Mano and Professor Bill Burns, which again, link in the description. To me as a little kid, Michael Myers was the scariest thing to me, and it's hard to describe why that is. As a kid watching this, what made it scary for me, I felt like I was in the movie fearing this killer who stalks his victims as prey and can kill you any second when least expected. If you know the basic plot of Halloween, you don't hear this part of the video, but if you're a new beginner to the franchise, here's the basic plot to the original Halloween from 1978. On Halloween 1963, 6-year-old Michael Myers murdered his older sister Judith Myers. Michael Myers was locked up for 15 years. 15 years later, on Halloween 1978, Michael Myers escapes Smith Grove Asylum and he begins stalking Laurie Strode, killing her friends for no reason. This movie came out around the Bronze Age of horror movies of the 70s and was a groundbreaking horror movie for its time. It was another example defining what horror was for the time. It's a great atmosphere, slow suspense, great jump scares with the soundtrack making it scary and effective. Jamie Lee Curtis plays Laurie Strode. This was her first movie, and it's ironic how a decade prior her mother Janet Leigh was in Psycho. It runs in the family, and passing the torch down to her. Jamie Lee Curtis was later going to be a famous iconic scream queen. Also, her father was Tony Curtis. Laurie Strode is a smart, shy girl. She's afraid to ask a guy on a date to a dance. She loves babysitting kids. She has a good bond with Tommy Doyle, almost like a younger brother and older sister type of bond. Laurie Strode was an example of a feminist character back in 70s horror movies, which was very common for the time where the female horror characters were the heroes and being the final girl in horror movies. In past horror movies, it was sometimes a couple or a group, or maybe sometimes it was the final man surviving a horror movie. Before Jamie Lee Curtis was cast as Laurie Strode, John Carpenter originally wanted actress Annie Lockhart for the role of Laurie Strode, but Debra Hill suggested to John Carpenter they cast Jamie Lee Curtis for the role. Laurie's friends Annie and Linda, Linda played by PJ Sauls, who prior to this was in the Stephen King horror movie Carrie. She's a cheerleader, popular pretty girl in school, and her boyfriend is Bob. Her famous catchphrase throughout this entire movie, totally, as a joke, you make a dream game out of this how many times she says that word totally. But don't do that, I'm only joking. Totally. She didn't die a virgin. After having sex, she asked her boyfriend Bob to get her a beer. Bob was about to get the beer. Michael Myers kills him. Michael Myers goes upstairs dressed as a ghost, and little does she know it's not Bob. Bob's dead, baby. She flashes her tits at Michael Myers, and she does not understand why she won't get her beer. She calls Laurie that Michael Myers strangles Linda to death with a phone cord. Definitely one of the best kills of this movie. Annie, played by Nancy Kyes, who was an assault on Precinct 13 prior to this movie. Around this time, she was married to Tommy Lee Wallace, who was one of the producers of this movie and other John Carpenter films. Annie's another one of Laurie's best friends who was babysitting Lindsay Wallace from across the street. She tries to help give advice to Laurie on asking someone on a date to the dance, but Laurie's too shy. Annie tries to set her with a boy named Ben Tramer, who Laurie has a crush on. Laurie feels embarrassed. Linda accidentally spilled butter on her shirt, and she had to wear something else. Lindsay's dog Lester hated Annie. For you dog lovers out there, it was a suspenseful thing that when she goes outside and washes her dirty clothes, Michael Myers kills the dog. She gets locked and you think this is the moment where Michael Myers is about to kill her, but no. Myers' house, it was not the right moment for Michael Myers to kill her. Annie and Laurie have a deal. If she looks after Lindsay, she will talk to Ben Tramer. After Annie drops off Lindsay with Laurie and Tommy, she's about to go pick up Paul so they can have sex. We never see Paul. He was voiced by John Carpenter, his Hitchcock cameo. The car is locked. She forgot the keys. She comes back, opens the door, has that moment of wait a minute. To me, as a little kid watching this scene, that scene just freaked me out as a kid. Dr. Loomis is the most compelling character in this movie. He's played by Donald Pleasence. From his first scene, I'm invested in this character. When I was rewatching this movie compared to watching this movie as a teenager, as an adult, I find myself more invested in the adult characters than the teen characters. Not to say the teen characters are bad, their conversations don't grab me the way Dr. Loomis' dialogue does. Dr. Loomis was Michael Myers' psychologist. After murdering his sister, he tried to help him, but no matter how hard Loomis tried, Loomis just could not help or cure him. It was just as simple as that. Michael Myers was just a pure evil lost soul. You see how worried, concerned, frustrated how studying Michael Myers has gotten to Loomis and messed up with his head, not knowing Michael Myers is a psychopath or a supernatural born the devil. Throughout the entire movie, you root for Dr. Loomis to find and stop Michael Myers to put an end to him. He knows what Michael Myers is capable of. He's like the Van Helsing in this movie, another example of good versus evil. I love the famous monologue scene when he's at the old Michael Myers house talking to Sheriff Brackett, explaining to him how he tried to help Michael Myers, but I said before, he saw Michael Myers was nothing but pure evil and could not be cured. His dialogue is the best part in this movie, especially that scene. The part when he's standing outside the hardware store waiting for Sheriff Brackett. Michael Myers is in the car and he passes him. This scene is an example of a Hitchcock effect, where a person is standing on a street and little does he know the killer passed him. The killer could be anywhere out in public without realizing it. The character Dr. Loomis was named after a character from Psycho. Even though I love this movie, the part when he's waiting for Sheriff Brackett at the old Myers house, the kid Lonnie and his friends are at the Myers house forcing Lonnie to go inside the house. He scares him in a creepy voice saying, "Hey Lonnie, get your ass away from there." They run off. Loomis has that smirk on his face, proud to have scared them, but also saved their life from getting hurt possibly. Despite playing a great character and doing a great job in this movie, Donald Pleasence said in an interview he did not get the point of this movie. He only did this movie to pay off alimony debt. Despite not enjoying this movie, Donald Pleasence, like any great actor like him, gives it his all right here. Prior to this, Donald Pleasence was known for playing a lot of bad guys like You Only Live Twice in the James Bond movie, but he wasn't the Great Escape with Steve McQueen trying to escape the Nazis. Before Donald Pleasence was cast as Dr. Loomis, John Carpenter said he originally wanted Peter Cushing or Christopher Lee for the role of Dr. Loomis because he was a fan of the Hammer movies. Christopher Lee turned down the role of Loomis because he did not like the script, thinking this movie would be a bomb, and the funny part is, he said he regretted turning down this role. Peter Cushing's agent turned down John Carpenter thinking he was too big of a high-profile actor to be in an indie horror movie. The year before, Peter Cushing was in Star Wars. If Peter Cushing played Dr. Samuel Loomis, he would have been like another different type of Van Helsing character. I don't think it was Peter Cushing's fault for turning down this role, it was his agent. I don't know who his agent was, but from stories I've heard, his agent was a real jerk. He also would have brought a different approach and portrayal as Dr. Loomis. Also, it could have been cool and interesting to see an old-school horror actor in the modern-day horror for that time. Whereas Donald Pleasence as Loomis was simple-minded, saying Michael Myers was evil. At the same time, Donald Pleasence is great in this movie, and hard to imagine any other actor playing this role. I once read Mel Brooks was considered for the role, but I'm kind of glad he did not play Dr. Loomis in this movie. He does not strike me as the character, and probably no one would have taken him seriously at the time because of his parody movies like Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, and High Anxiety. Michael Myers has no reason to kill. That's what makes it scary, simple, straightforward. Unlike past horror movies where the characters go to haunted houses with the killer, Michael Myers stalks, then he kills his victims, killing them at the right moment when he's got them trapped. I used to get scared and freaked out when Michael Myers is outside stalking Laurie Strode, but nothing has happened yet. He doesn't run, he walks to kill his victims. My theory on this is he walks slow, so that when his victims run away from him, they will run out of breath fast. Michael Myers will catch up and kill them. I'd like to shout to the bullies, pick on Tommy Doyle. One of the boys is running, Michael Myers stops him, and the kid runs away. Michael Myers stalks Tommy Doyle, his head is cut off. Michael Myers looks at his kids as innocent. Just like Dracula, Frankenstein, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, Jigsaw, Pinhead, and Chucky, Michael Myers is really ready to become such an iconic horror villain character. Michael Myers is called The Shape, but he's never referred to by that name in this movie or any of the rest of the sequel franchises. As I said before, he's a character that stalks his victims, unlike previous horror movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Psycho.
Despite not being called The Shape in this
character went to the killers.
he's listed in the
in
credits
this
as
movie,
The
the killer
Shape.
goes after his victims. The movie opens up with the killer's point of view killing his older sister, and we find out it was a little boy dressed in a clown costume who killed his older sister. This was not a new camera trick in horror movies. Black Christmas, Peeping Tom, and later in the first Friday the 13th movie uses camera technique. 2 years ago in 2022, I met Nick Castle, who played Michael Myers in this movie. As you can see, I'm not sure you can see, he signed my Blu-ray / 4K copy of Halloween. It was awesome. I asked Nick Castle how he got the part of playing Michael Myers, and he told me how he knew John Carpenter. They were friends from college and film school. He helped John in his short movies, and was in Dark Stars, The Beach Ball Alien. I'm not joking on that one. He was originally just supposed to just hang out on set and watch John direct because he wanted to be a director too. Then John Carpenter told him he liked the way he walked and said, "You'll play the killer Michael Myers." I also told him how he really scared me as Michael Myers. I could have talked to this guy all day long at the same time. Gotta keep the line moving. It was a nice 5-minute chat with Nick Castle and a pleasure meeting him. Meeting someone who scared me as a kid became my favorite horror villain character. Nick Castle was going to direct movies himself. He was going to direct movies like The Last Starfighter, The Boy Who Could Fly, the 90s Dennis the Menace remake, and Major Payne. Despite Nick Castle playing Michael Myers throughout the entire movie, Michael Myers was also played by a variety of actors in this movie. Will Sandler played Michael Myers when he was a little boy. It has one of the best opening scenes to a horror movie when you see the killer's point of view, just like Black Christmas. And it's also a shocker that it was a little boy who killed his sister. You see how he's not innocent, and again, no explanation of why this kid was pure evil. The less we know, the scarier it is. Tony Moran played Michael Myers for the unmasking scene. I'm not sure why Nick Castle was not used for the unmasking scene. Debra Hill played Michael briefly when Laurie stabs Michael in the family room with a sewing kit. Producer Tommy Lee Wallace, I'm not sure which scene he did, plays Michael Myers. John Carpenter supposedly played Michael Myers. I'm not sure which scene he also played Michael Myers in. When Michael strangles Laurie and she unmasks him, he looks like a normal person, but he's the devil inside. The mask was a resemblance to Star Trek actor William Shatner. Because this movie is low budget, they did not have time or money to make their own mask. They bought the mask at a store. It was a choice between William Shatner, a clown mask. There was also a possibility of using a Richard Nixon or Spock Halloween mask. I'm glad I did not use those masks. It would not have made any sense. I don't see a Richard Nixon mask working. It sounded like a post-Watergate slasher horror movie. Former President Richard Nixon killing people riding out during Watergate. John Carpenter chose the William Shatner mask because he's a big Star Trek fan. Before I knew this, the mask of Michael Myers really scared me as a kid. Anytime I saw Michael Myers' mask, I used to freak out. The mask is purely evil, has no personality. I think another reason why I was afraid and scared of Michael Myers was that he could not die, no matter how many times Michael Myers got stabbed or shot. Just when you think he was stabbed by Laurie, you see him get up like a zombie, and you're like, what? How is he still alive? How is this possible? Also, this movie is realistic. This could have happened to anyone in real life, but of course, no one is invincible. I could be wrong on this. It may have been the first time in a slasher movie where the villain was supernatural, hence the devil. Michael Myers was unstoppable. There's debate on Michael Myers fans on whether or not Michael Myers can die or not. In my own personal opinion, Michael Myers can't die. Remember, you can't kill the boogeyman. In the book I have on the making of the Halloween movies, I read that John Carpenter based Michael Myers on some mental patient he studied and saw at some psychiatric place. I'm not sure the name of the place or the person. When he wrote this movie, he would go to psychiatric centers to get an idea for the Michael Myers character. The part where Michael Myers kills Bub, when he tilts his head, it's like if a serial killer was looking at admiring his killing as a work of art. The scene when Tommy Doyle and Lindsay Wallace are watching horror movies on cable TV. Remember kids, this was pre-streaming services, and no such thing as home video until a decade later. They're watching the original The Thing from Another World from 1951. And what's ironic about this scene, this foreshadows that John Carpenter will later go on to direct the Thing remake 4 years later in 1982. John Carpenter was a fan of that movie and said it really scared him when he was a little kid, and it was also a movie that inspired him to become a filmmaker. In a way, despite directing movies prior to Halloween, this movie really got his name on board and made him the filmmaker he would later become. This movie made him a big shot director. I like the Michael Myers house setting after the murder of his sister, that it could be haunted. Also, that house where they shot this movie is now a chiropractic place. I'm not sure I go there to get my body adjusted. The horror films have been pointed out as a myth and stereotype how the rules of horror movies, if you have sex in a movie, you get killed. But that's not the case for every horror movie. But that is a stereotype in a lot of slasher movies. Some fans have said the victims who die not just because they have sex, it's because after sex they're letting their guard down, not knowing a killer's on the loose. Also, no drugs, despite Laurie smokes pot with Annie before they go babysit. Despite Laurie survives. Whatever, don't question it, just take it with a grain of salt and accept it as it is. The movie takes place in Haddonfield, which is named after Haddonfield, New Jersey, where producer Debra Hill was born and raised. Whenever I go to Monster Mania in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, I pass the sign Haddonfield, New Jersey on the way over. I know this movie has a fall feeling, yet this movie is shot in California during the summertime. What really makes this movie scary is the music. This is my favorite horror movie soundtrack. The first time I heard this movie, I was scared and had goosebumps. When this movie was being made, there was no soundtrack at the time. Without this soundtrack, this movie would not be scary. The soundtrack is scary when it has jump scares done at the right moment. Back at my old job working at a gym front desk clerkman, when it came time for closing, I would play the Halloween soundtrack as I was cleaning up the place. Why not? My boss was not around. He wasn't going to come in and tell me to turn the soundtrack off. Disclaimer, my former boss was a good guy. With Laurie concerned on the phone call she got from Linda not knowing she was choked to death, Laurie goes across the street to the Wallace house investigating, thinking it was a prank. She enters the house dark, pitch black. She finds her dead friend's body, is horrified, freaked out. Michael Myers slits her arm, she falls down. Michael Myers chases her. Jamie Lee Curtis's yelling and screaming is very convincing and believable. When Laurie shouts and screams for help, one of the neighbors turns off the lights and does not open the door to let her in the house to save her. It shows that despite living in a suburban middle-class rural area community, it shows that you're not safe. As a kid watching this chase scene, I remember being on the edge of my seat rooting for Jamie Lee Curtis to run away and get out. It's scary when she's outside the Doyle house. Her keys must have fallen out when she fell down the stairs. Michael Myers is slowly approaching. You're like, Tommy, wake up, get downstairs, save Laurie. Prior to this horror movie, it took place in rural areas of Europe, haunted houses, cabin in the woods, New York City like Rosemary's Baby. This horror movie takes place in a rural, suburban, middle-class area. Just when you think it was safe, after you think Laurie stabs Michael Myers, he gets up, chokes her, then Loomis comes into the rescue, shoots Michael Myers 6 times. He falls off a balcony. You think, yes, victory, success. Michael Myers is laying down on the ground dead. Laurie asks Loomis, was that the boogeyman? He replies, as a matter of fact, it was. He looks again and Michael is gone. Originally, Donald Pleasant was going to shout Michael, but honestly, the facial expression on his face is all we need to see, how he's in shock, that he shot him 6 times, that Michael Myers is still alive and out there. As a kid, I was frightened and scared of this cliffhanger ending, knowing Michael Myers is still alive and still out there. They could still kill me. After watching this movie as a little kid, I could not sleep 1 wink that night. I'm not joking. I went to school the next day like Laurie Strode, looked out the window thinking Michael Myers was stalking me. James Rolfe did a video on the Mandela Effect as a kid for my Mandela Effect. I had this vision of seeing Halloween as a kid, thinking this movie was a blood gore fest. But watching over the years, I realized this movie is not a blood gore fest as I remember as a kid. But again, kids have different point of views compared to adults. With this movie's success, it spawned a franchise, and other slasher movies were inspired from this film. Despite this movie's success and popularity, one thing I agree with other horror fans is that 4 years prior, the slasher horror Christmas movie Black Christmas came out and basically overshadowed that movie. Basically, Halloween made the slasher subgenre popular. You will see a video on the original Black Christmas soon, where you hear more in-depth on that with my friend Bill Burns. People think this was the first slasher movie, but sadly that's incorrect. But it did make the slasher subgenre popular around that time. Whether you like Scream or not, Scream took inspiration from Halloween and parodied the stereotypical cliches in slasher subgenre. The movie is inspired by a lot of slasher movie knockoffs, but that will be a very long list. I'm sure you can go online and look up slasher movies that were inspired for Halloween. This film also inspired me. If I ever made a horror movie, I want to make it in this style combined with the original Black Christmas. If there were film courses on horror movies, this one should be watched. One thing I forgot to mention about not only was like Michael Myers the scariest thing, this is one of the scariest movie soundtracks to me when I was a little kid. Back when I was a little kid in the 2000s, my uncle used to do haunted house attraction. He would play the Halloween soundtrack.
I remember my dad would call my uncle to tell him not to play the soundtrack. We used to go visit him. Now that I'm older, me and my uncle joke about how much I love this movie and the series.
There's a TV version of this movie, but with only added-in scenes that were filmed a few years later when Halloween 2 was coming out. Around that time when this movie first aired on television. Why the new add-in scenes? I don't know why that is. Again, I'm not comparing both cuts, but we'll briefly mention which scenes I did like. I like the add-in scenes with Dr. Loomis when he's at some board meeting discussing Michael Myers' case that he should be locked up at some higher maximum security. And after Michael Myers escapes, he got an idea where Michael was going after seeing the Sam Hain thing on the wall. The add-in scene I don't like is the scene when Linda comes by Laurie's house asking to borrow something. This scene was not necessary, serves no purpose, and could have been cut out easily. To me, the extended TV cut is not necessary. When I watched the original first Halloween movie, I watched the first one just the way it was. This is a movie I can watch any time around the year, even if it's not Halloween. But every year around Halloween in October, I'll watch this movie at least once in October if it's not on Halloween. Siskel and Debra loved this movie, but after that they hated and bashed and trashed Halloween knockoff slasher movies. There was a novelization of this movie, but I never read that book.
I remember during the pandemic, I read some, Halloween Michael Myers comic books, that some of them were pretty good. I don't remember all the comics I read, but I remember a few basic ones that come to mind, like, for example, I remember there was a comic book showing what happened to Laurie Strode after Halloween 2 during the rest of her senior year, how she had post-traumatic stress disorder, was not the same person after that event. I also remember reading, prequel comic books of, Michael Myers' life before he killed his sister, how in one comic book he caught his sister having sex with her boyfriend when they were on some camping trip. There's also a prequel comic book how it shows, what happened during the years when Dr. Loomis was trying to help Michael Myers. I remember he falls in love with one of his colleagues, and Michael Myers kills her. This makes Dr. Loomis more frustrated after when he lost the love of his life.
Before I end this video, here's a recording of my friend Joey giving his thoughts on the original Halloween movie. You will see him throughout the rest of the Halloween video series.
Halloween 1978. It's a cool movie, and it stars Jamie Lee Curtis. She was in Terror Train 2 from 1981. That was another cool movie. Halloween, though, the first one was one of my best out of the series. Of course, I like part 2 and 3, and even 3, well, later I'll get into that in the other reviews, but part 3, I have to say, 2 is really cool, even though Michael Myers wasn't in it. But yeah, there's some sequels, too, I like out of Halloween. But the first one was my favorite. And Halloween is Friday the 13th, was really a cool series too, because they made a lot of of course the first one was really good too, but they made a lot of the even the sequels were really good. They made a lot of good sequels with that and that series, and it's the same thing with Halloween. They really made a lot of good sequels too. Of course, though, like I said, the first one was my best, but there's other ones too that were really good in this series. So yeah, Halloween is a cool series too. Donald Pleasant is another cool character in the Halloween series. Part 6 was his last movie in the series, unfortunately, but he was in a lot of them though. And I always watch this movie around Halloween. Even when it's not Halloween, I watch it at times, but around the season too. But I recommend this movie. It's a cool movie from 1978. I recommend it. It's really good. It's really cool. Oh, and Kyle Richards was in it too. The girl, she was the one that was in another movie too from the 70s. Eaten Alive. I remember that one too. She was around the same age, but that was actually before Halloween. But that was another cool movie too. I liked from the 70s. But yeah, Halloween was. I strongly recommend this movie.
My advice is when how to watch it at night, lights are turned off, and be spooked out. Remember, it's Halloween, and everyone's entitled to one good scare.